So when I was thinking about putting this panel together, I thought a lot about my own experience playing IP-related games throughout my career as a gamer, which spans many, many years. And when I thought back to some of the early IP games I played, things like Lawnmower Man for regular Nintendo, there's some pretty bad games. You know, a lot of the early WWE games, they just kind of pumped a new one out every year. They're button mashers, real, you know, kind of just not really thoughtful productions. And I was starting to talk to some people about some of the worst IP games that they'd ever played, and I came across a pretty funny review from Pocket Gamer from almost exactly 9 years ago. There was a game, a Fox property, Simpsons, Meltdown to Mobile, and just to quote the article to give you guys a sense of what some of the IP games were like about 10 years ago. EA's Mobile's Minutes to Meltdown isn't the official game of the Simpsons film. However, the timing of its release and the prominent role played by Spider-Pig are clearly meant to tempt moviegoers into paying a $5 for what might be their first mobile game download, which sadly is a shame because in those cases, many people will go away thinking that mobile games are a waste of money. The review went on to talk about the game as a wanton waste of a great license and to describe the play session as taking no more than 19 minutes, even if you wandered around and kind of tried to make it longer than it actually was. So a lot's changed since then. You know, now enter the world of free-to-play, and it's no longer about just putting a pretty logo on a box and selling something off the shelf, and now it's about actually creating a great game, something that's engaging. And I think what I've noticed as a consumer is that a lot of these IP-driven games are actually some of the best games out there. So it's been really interesting to see that happen. And I think today what I'd love to do is to dive into a little bit of that, understand sort of how some of the most prominent developer, publishers, and licensors out there are thinking about the business and how they're thinking about their IPs and maximizing them in this crazy world of gaming. So we'll leave some time for questions at the end. Please feel free to ask anything. And I guess just to start things off, I'll let everyone introduce themselves. And why don't we start with a little anecdote of either a game you've been involved with, something kind of interesting or something you're proud of that you've been involved with on the IP side in the past couple years.
I guess I'll start. My name is Chris Akhavan. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Glue Mobile. We're best known for games like Kim Kardashian Hollywood, Racing Rivals, most recently Gordon Ramsay Dash. One anecdote that I'm proud of is we acqui-hired a studio that's now our Tap Sports Baseball studio, and we first put that Tap Sports Baseball game into beta. It wasn't looking great, but then I secured the MLB player's license for that game, and sort of overnight we saw LTV jump by 52% through having real players, so that was a cool moment.
Great. Hi, I'm Bill Kispert. I'm EVP of Digital at Universal Pictures, looking after our games business. So I've been in the business since back in the console days. One of my best memories is working on a King Kong game with Peter Jackson, where we had the development team from Ubisoft and Michel Ancel, who you might know from Beyond Good and Evil, was the designer of that game, just taking him and his team to New Zealand and putting them in a room with all the amazing craftspeople at Weta and Peter Jackson's team, and then just sort of letting, you know, creatives sort of work together. That's really like where the, you know, where the magic happens. And I feel like as a business person, if I can get those creatives in a room and let them do their thing, then good things are going to turn out of it. And then flash forward to more recently, where we sort of, you know, took a team from a publisher, put them with the animators who work on Despicable Me and the Minions, and same kind of thing. Like, just let the creatives work together, and good things will happen.
Hi, I'm Jameel, Khalfan. I work on business development at Pocket Gems. I think for me, we partnered with the movie Mean Girls recently and released kind of a sequel to the movie in our episode platform. That was one of my favorite movies when it came out, and so it was really rewarding to kind of work on that, you know, for my actual work. So that was really a fun project. I also made a game for the movie Night at the Museum. Have to mention that with Devin. That was really fun. Got to see the movie before it came out, and it was really great to work on that as well.
Hi guys, I'm Devin Radford, VP Biz Dev at Fox. My favorite licensed moment was the first time Matt Groening said my name unprompted. So being able to work with some of our animated TV brands has been unbelievable. But like as a kid, Matt Groening was always just like, I mean, his signature was all over my close, and I love The Simpsons, and working with him on a Futurama game and some other stuff has been really rewarding, and that's my best memory so far.
Cool. So just to get things started, I think it would be interesting to hear from some of the developer publishers on the panel, how you guys think about identifying the types of IP you want to work on. What does that top of the funnel moment in time look like when you're choosing amongst the world of any IP that's out there and deciding what type of game to make?
Yeah, for Glue, I mean, we've always started with the core game engine first. Like, we haven't actually gone out there and looked at IP and said, oh, we could make this kind of game for that IP. It's really been driven by, we have a great baseball game, let's find real baseball player license to put in there, or we have a game called Stardom Hollywood that would really come to life if we found the right personality. That's where the Kim partnership came from. And then most recently, the Dash franchise, Cooking Dash, we thought if we find the right celebrity chef to attach to this, it could be pretty big, and who else better than to partner with Gordon Ramsay. So for us, it's always been about what game engine do we have that we can really accelerate with a license, and then let's go find the best license for that.
I think for us, we took a similar approach. Right now, we're focused on doing a lot of our licensing for our episode platform, which we consider more of a platform and not quite a game. That affords us a lot of opportunities to take properties that people love and turn them into stories that are very narrative driven. So for us, we actually ask our users. We have a very large user base, and we'll regularly survey them and ask them, what would you like to see in here? We'll give them some choices, or just have kind of a free response and end up taking those answers and trying to figure out based on that, which ones would be the best fit.
Cool, and I guess, flipping it to the other side, from the licensor perspective, how are you guys determining how to prioritize certain IPs over others? You're dealing with a whole catalog. How are you guys thinking about what types of genres might be a fit for specific properties? What does that look like on your end?
Right, so at Universal, even though we don't develop and publish games ourselves currently, we work with, partners such as the folks on the panel to put games out. We have game producers on our staff. And so our first thing when we come out of a meeting with a filmmaker and we learn about a new film, we try to filter ourselves and say, like, okay, we can make a game out of anything, but should we? And really try to think about what's the design hook, what's the mechanic, what's the features that's going to be compelling to really make players not only want to sort of download and install a game or purchase a game, but then stick with it for a long period of time. And if we can't answer that question ourselves, then we won't take that out to the community and try to put a deal. But if we can answer that question, then the next step is really who's the team out there anywhere in the world who will share the creative vision that we have, will share the same passion that we have for the IP, that has sort of the technological capabilities with the engines they're working with, to sort of bring the idea that collectively have to life. So it's really that, should it be a game, and if it is, then how do we find the best sort of partners in the world to sort of bring that vision to life?
Yeah, I mean, everything that Bill said, I agree with. That's how we approach our film properties, for sure. I would just emphasize nothing replaces passion on the team, on the development team that's proposing to work on any of our IPs. So when we see a team that's really passionate about the brand, has really great ideas, and are tying them to some kind of expertise that they have in an area, whether it's a certain genre or type of gameplay, that's when we really go, okay, this is. And I'll give it a really good example is TinyCo, and I always bring this up, but they did such an amazing job finding the Family Guy brand and bringing it to life in a game that's relatively light on mechanics, and that's passion for us is probably the most important thing.
Cool. So I guess, for the licensors as well, diving a little bit deeper, I mean, are there things that you will and won't do with a brand? Like, are there things, if I come to you and I say, hey, I want to make a match 3 for Avatar, is that something that that you guys just sort of are open to, or are you guys, how does that look for you guys in terms of those sorts of unique ideas?
Well, I'm definitely not going to answer that specifically, but, and it's complicated. Yeah, of course, there's a lot of things we won't do. I think it really depends on the IP. If you're talking about a brand like Avatar, when you've got such an engaged and important stakeholder like James Cameron, his vision needs to be through all of the products that we do, from the film to the T-shirts to the games. At the end of the day, what we're creating is hopefully additive and something that can take the brand and extend it to another platform. But at the end of the day, what we're doing is just supporting the film. So we can never really do anything that conflicts with the vision and isn't really holding true to it.
Right, but I do think there's been an evolution in the space and at studios in particular where sort of most folks now realize that, games are not really going to be a retelling of the films, right? They're really going to extend that fiction, tell a parallel story or a sequel or a prequel or fill in the blanks, like really give something more to the fan. And because of that, I think there are, some creative liberties that can be taken if they're in the service of gameplay, right? If it's just sort of a random idea that comes up, then I think we'll question that. But if we sit in one of our development meetings with a game partner and there's a creative liberty being proposed that isn't so far away from the brand that it would feel wrong to the consumer, but it's something that hasn't existed in the franchise before. If it's logical from a gameplay and game design standpoint, we will definitely consider that. And I'll give one anecdote from a ways back. But we made a Scarface game back in the day, and I remember clearly the producer coming in and saying, "Hey, we want to have Tony Montana not die." Right, the game is going to start with the final sequence of the film, like one of the most iconic moments in cinematic history. And the game producer was like, "We want Tony not to die." And like the immediate reaction is, "Are you crazy? Like how are we going to justify that to fans?" When you really get into it, they're like, okay, we're making an open world game. We're asking the players to invest hundreds of hours of their time in this game. If they know that their character that they've invested all this time in is going to die at the end of that, like what's the likelihood of them putting the time in? So when you think about it from that perspective, it made a lot of sense from game design. We went back, talked to the producers at the time and internal stakeholders, and everybody was like, yeah, we get it, right? And that game went on to be a very successful sort of extension of the Scarface brand. So just one example of like if there's a thoughtful process by the developers, we're usually open to some of those ideas.
Yeah, that's definitely a good example. I can actually give another one where we've seen brands kind of increasingly being open to creative ideas that may not be obvious on the surface. We actually did a partnership with the WWE. I think this was like last year, where we integrated the WWE wrestlers into our Racing Rivals game. So, car racing game, high-end sports cars, not the most obvious thing to put WWE personalities into there, but actually it was a smash hit. We went to WWE and showed them, hey, there's a good audience overlap here. We think the audience is going to like this content, and ultimately it worked really well for everybody.
Yeah, definitely a cool fit, something that's a little different. And I guess I'd even say that, at least from where I was sitting, something like Kim Kardashian was a big risk, where it's like a game about a celebrity who sort of just represents celebrity. It didn't really make a lot of sense to everyone on the surface, so pretty interesting there. I mean, I guess sort of going a little bit deeper there, for both sides, on the licensor side, what are you guys seeing being done well? And then on the developer, publisher side, what are you guys doing that you're finding to be effective in terms of best practices to sort of having these, moments of creativity that allow you to come up with a Kim Kardashian type of idea? Or, how do you figure out that the WWE fans would also be interested in Racing Rivals and vice versa? What does that actually look like mechanically? Is it a gut thing? Are you running, surveys in game? Is it paid surveys outside of game? How do you get there?
Yeah, we definitely look at, like Jameel said, we also, we rely on things like surveying our users. So Sangeeta's sitting right here. She worked on some user research surveys when we were looking at Gordon Ramsay and understanding like how our Cooking Dash audience viewed him and things like that. So there's definitely like a direct one-to-one kind of CRM component of understanding your own audience. And we also obviously analyze, like their social metrics and the engagement they're getting on networks like Facebook and Instagram and so on. And then in addition to that, we look at things like if they're a TV personality, how many unique people are they reaching every week? What's the cadence of how often they show up on different programs? And how kind of evergreen are they as a personality or as a brand?
Yeah, we do a lot of the same research. We'll look at, if we're working with people that have big social media presences, we'll look at not only how many followers they have, but what's the engagement of those followers. Are they commenting? Are they liking posts? Are they retweeting a bunch of things that they say? We'll also take a look at where those followers are. And for us, we want to make sure that the game engine, the IP, and the users all match together. So, for example, on our episode platform, the users tend to skew a little bit younger than kind of the people that work at the company, and so they're mostly on Snapchat or on Instagram, and less so on other social networks. So we'll take a look at, if we're going to be working with with a celebrity, we'll make sure that they do have a big presence on those social networks in addition to some of the other ones that maybe some of the people like myself use.
And after these guys are done doing all that research, We work with the creators to try and create something new, tell a new story, create parallel story, create a compelling content that the fans of this brand will engage with and say, wow, this is something new for me. That's the goal. We're not always able to accomplish it. I mean, I think in mobile, the games can be sort of slices, bite-sized pieces of the brand, or we can be doing something that's more narrative focused, like Pocket Gems is doing, well, and Glue too. That's telling new story and bringing new content to the users.
Yeah, but I think we're always willing to share sort of research that we have about our film audience and our film fans, and then sort of match that up with the research that the publishers are bringing, from the game playing audience, and kind of see where the overlap is. And we've had some good instances where, we're sitting with a filmmaker, and they'll say, hey, we have this sort of concept or idea that, we loved, and for whatever reason, it's not finding its way into the film. Who knows why, time, budget, but it's just a really strong idea, and sometimes that can even sort of, end up materializing into what the game becomes.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So, one of the things that both Chris and Jameel, you guys have touched on, which I think is a really interesting trend, is kind of the idea of a platform. Chris, you didn't mention it exactly like this, but I would consider what you guys did with Racing Rivals to be sort of a platform play, integrating IP into something that already exists, and I guess disparate IP at that in some ways. So I guess I'd like to understand a little bit from your guys' perspective, sort of what the advantages of doing something like this are. For Pocket Gems, is that kind of the focus? Are you guys looking at sort of other games as sort of standalone IP-driven products? And kind of, why are you making some of these choices around platform versus product, with some of these IPs?
Yeah, so for us, we're definitely looking at both, but I'd say right now the focus is on a platform strategy. One of the advantages that we see to doing that is that you don't have to launch a new app every time you have a new IP. So that's really beneficial. I'm sure a lot of people here know user acquisition costs are really high. I'm sure there'll be a lot of people out here telling you they can get you low CPIs, but you want to make sure that you have good users as well. And so if you're launching a new game every single time, you're going to have to pay a lot of money for marketing. You're going to have to try and do new PR each time and all of that. So for us, the advantage of having a platform with millions of users is that whenever we launch a new IP, we have a built-in user base that will automatically get to see it. You don't need to convince them to download a new app. You don't have to convince them to do anything. They just open the app that they're already using, and it's just right there. So that's been really beneficial for us in finding complementary IPs to go into the platform, so that whenever we do get sort of new users coming in, there's a bunch of other stuff there that they can stick around and do.
Yeah, definitely. We view it the same way. I mean, the industry's gotten so competitive that you almost have to view any game as becoming a platform. And even if it is a game that's fronted by a single personality, like our Kim Kardashian game, that has also been a platform in its own right. And we've had brands like Judith Lieber Couture show up in there, Karl Lagerfeld. We've had cameos from a lot of her friends and people that are associated with her, kind of woven into the game's narrative. So even though it is a Kim Kardashian game, it's really under the hood. It's a larger platform of lots of different brands and personalities making appearances.
What's the perception of that from the other side? I mean, from the licensor side. I mean, and this dives into sort of another area that I think is interesting, especially in the world of unlimited shelf space, which is the bifurcation of rights and lack of exclusivity on some of the biggest IPs that are out there. Scopely, we have one of our own games, which is The Walking Dead. It competes directly against multiple other Walking Dead products in the App Store. I mean, how do you guys view sort of some of those issues in this context? Do you think about those things? Is that sort of the licensee's problem, and you guys are trying to exploit it as many ways as possible? What does that look like?
Yeah, I would say definitely not the latter in terms of exploiting as many ways as possible. We want to be smart about our brands. We want to extract value from our brands, but we want to be thoughtful in that process. I mean, I think the notion of integrations is always something that we talk a lot about internally when those opportunities present themselves. Like, our goal is generally to try to have standalone games around our IP that can sort of sustain themselves for many years and be sort of entertainment experiences in their own right. That said, there are integration opportunities that make a lot of sense. It's a somewhat unpredictable business. If you're going into an existing game or an existing platform, right, it might be a little bit more predictable in terms of what the outcome might be there. So I think we always think about it like, is it the right fit? What's the experience going to be for the end user? how the brands really work together. Like, we felt good about an integration we did last year with Microsoft and the Forza team, where we put some Fast and Furious content into the Forza game. And one of the things that was appealing there was, we wanted the most high quality vehicles represented for Fast and Furious that we could possibly get, and we thought that the Turn 10 team up at Microsoft was the best in the world at doing something like that. But it wasn't just take the cars and sort of put them in the game, right? We created some dialogue. We had Ludacris come in and do some voiceover, for that experience. So, we felt like it was a good representation of Fast and Furious in that regard. So those are things that we're always weighing when these opportunities come up.
Yeah, sitting on this side of the table in mobile games over the past 4 years has been pretty good. Obviously, everyone knows how the market has done in the last 4 years, in particular since 2012 or so. So brands have obviously, the value of brands has been elevated on this platform. We've constantly battled with, how often do we license, how many games do we have in market. It's really only a question for our biggest brands, but we're extremely careful about it. We manage it very closely. We're, at the end of the day, I think if the brand is big enough and has a wide enough audience, there is room in some cases to do different games in different genres, and you might end up having a bit of an overlap of the audience, but you can reach them by having multiple products. But if you're not careful about when you launch and what the content is and all that stuff, it can be damaging to a brand. I think I'm not going to name any names, but I think there are some brands out there that everybody knows that are notoriously over licensed, and who knows how successful those brands could be if they had room to breathe and continue to hold their audience.
Actually, Henry, what has your guys' experience been with The Walking Dead, having a couple titles out there competing with each other?
Yeah, it's been really fascinating, actually. I mean, I think from our perspective, we feel very fortunate that we got to market first, to be really honest. And that was something that we were very paranoid about throughout production. It was very much on our mind. We did a lot of competitive analysis around the other game. I think there is some crossover, and I think they're both really strong titles in their own right. They tend to hit slightly different audiences, so I think we've catered our marketing as such. But yeah, The Walking Dead is one of those brands, I think, where it is big enough and evergreen enough, at least right now, to support multiple mid-core games. Could there, if there were 5, 6, 7, big titles out there that everyone was marketing heavily, it might start to get a little bit messy. But for us, it's been all right, and I actually think that the competitive product, Road to Survival, and No Man's Land, they've both done pretty well, in their own right.
I mean, I think as a brand owner, as we look at some of our franchises, right, that are multi-billion-dollar franchises, and it sounds cliche, but they really are 4-quadrant films, and we think it's hard to make a game that would really appeal to everyone, but be interested to sort of get some input on that from the publisher side. But so that might be an instance where we say, hey, having multiple games makes sense, but very clearly segmented by genre, very sort of clearly segmented by demographic and so on, because we feel like in some cases, if we don't do that, then we're maybe leaving part of our audience unserved. And if we have a mid-core game, maybe that casual fan of IP is just never going to play that game. It's too hard. It's too sort of inaccessible for them. So how do we make sure that we're delivering an experience to all parts of our audience while being very respectful of the business relationships we have?
Yeah, I think it gets pretty nuanced too, actually. I'm just thinking aloud here, but with regards to Dice and Yahtzee, which is our other big family of products, Dice and Yahtzee have somewhat of a different audience, and it might just be that Dice has been in the market for a little bit longer, and Yahtzee is new and is a splashier, younger feeling IP, I guess, even though it's a board game. Dice is unbranded and is just kind of the older game. So you do see slight differences in audience, and it's a nuanced distinction, but they're not cannibalizing each other. We thought Yahtzee was going to be a lot smaller than it was when we launched it, because we'd been acquiring users against the Dice brand for so long, and we were pretty surprised that even just a different color and a different name, when it's really the same game, actually makes a big difference.
It's the first time I think I've heard that Yahtzee's a young brand, maybe since the 60s or so.
It's not the youngest brand, but
it's doing amazing.
Rejuvenated.
Yeah. Cool. So great. In terms of marketing an IP, and I guess we're getting into this a little bit, identifying that audience. I mean, I think a lot of, I mean, I'll say for us, there was a period of time at Scopely when we viewed IP in a sense as, hey, this is sort of your marketing. I think we don't take that approach today. I think most sophisticated companies aren't just spending on an MG or on the production and then putting a game out there with IP. I think that you're sort of in a sense wasting that investment. Like, what are the right ways to market IP? How do you start to identify where these games actually sit in the market and how to get to that target audience and then ideally beyond?
I'll speak to it from, I guess, working with an individual personality. Because, yeah, for sure, you cannot just rely on putting a big celebrity on your game and hoping that's going to actually make it download. Like, you have to put a lot of effort into that partnership and truly leveraging that celebrity's distribution power to drive awareness and ultimately downloads to the game. I think that comes from the very early stages of making sure that the celebrity you're partnered with is highly engaged and actually genuinely passionate about the project. And we saw that with Gordon, for example, that he was very in the details on the game design. We could tell that he was actually really cared about it from a core perspective. And then beyond that, it's really working closely with them, their PR teams, their management on understanding, is this personality going to be on late night shows, doing interviews, like really maxing out every possible channel, not just, hey, post it on your Facebook page. So yeah, we've learned a lot about that.
So is that something you're actually incentivizing them to do, or are you forcing them to commit to that contractually, or is it a little bit of a dance that you do around?
Yeah, honestly, I think we've discovered that if you have to contractually force it, you're probably screwed to begin with. I mean, obviously in the contract we put kind of a minimum threshold of like, we'll at least get this amount of activity. But the right partnerships, you can really tell that that's not even relevant, that they're really, from the beginning, they're going to use every promotional channel in their power to push the game because they actually really care about it. And so we're much more concerned with making sure we have that type of an arrangement from day one than from necessarily putting every little line item in the agreement.
Yeah, we also kind of the same way. I've worked both with talent and working with brands as well, and I think Chris did a good job of explaining working with an individual. I think the other part of that is on our side, we also don't kind of just sit around and wait for the game to get downloads. We'll also go off and do our own performance marketing and user acquisition, and still kind of do all the same channels that we would even if it was an unbranded game, except in this case we have the IP to help increase the click-through rate on the ads, or make it more likely that someone might be searching for it in the App Store and happen to see some really cool screenshots and download it that way. So we see the IP as a way to enhance the marketing. There's certainly stuff that the IP holder can do, but we also need to do our part as well and make sure that we use that to help drive marketing.
Yeah, I'd agree a lot with what Jameel was saying. Like, we found the most success where both parties are sort of working together and we're able to sort of drive our broad audience to a game through the channels that we have, and then the publisher is doing what they're very good at, which is like really sort of targeting into sort of a game player base and bringing sort of high value users to a mix. And usually when those two pieces are working together, we've found success. There's a lot of coordination that's required. So if we're usually having a massive sort of media campaign around a film launch, and the game publisher is coming out of that window and they're doing their media campaign, like we like to have sort of media buyers and sort of marketing folks from the publisher sit with our internal media team and marketing team to make sure that we're being coordinated in how those buys are being done, so that we're not cannibalizing each other, that we're actually maybe sort of getting additive value through the joint purchases. That can happen. So it's like that kind of coordination that doesn't always happen, but if sort of both parties are willing to do that, then that usually turns out to be some of the most effective campaigns.
And it's super important to treat the marketing assets the same way you treat the content of the game, and creating the voice and keeping the ads true to the vision of the brand. I mean, it kind of sounds funny, but treating it as part of the content is really important, and finding the audience, and it also helps if you're working with really sophisticated publishers that know how to find audiences.
Yeah, definitely. So when when you guys are partnering, with a publisher or developer, and you're thinking about what that relationship looks like, I mean, what are sort of the right and wrong ways of working with a licensor? Like, how does this look when it's working really well? Like, let's get you've got your IP, you've identified the game, everyone's happy with the marketing plan and going forward. Does the developer just go away and make a game? Like, is it always case by case, and it just really depends on the creator? Like, how do you guys broker that on your side?
Yeah, it's always case by case for us. It really depends on the creator or the director or whoever's the big stakeholder on the content side. But our group is really iterative. We're seeing builds very frequently. We're not doing milestones. We're trying our best to make the best possible game we can make. Our team our production team is completely games background. We're not like film studio people. So. It's just really important to have constant communication, making sure that the stakeholders on our side that need to see the game see it as often as possible, and there's no surprises, and just being iterative and constructive with your partner.
That makes sense. I mean, even going back a stage, like when we're starting to talk to people about IP, like you'd be surprised how many folks come in to sort of talk about an IP, but haven't actually like seen the films or don't know the characters, or so first off, I would say like know the IP that you're coming in to talk about, and when that happens, then we feel great, and we'll say, hey, here's a developer who sort of loves this IP as much as we do. We want to expose that developer and publisher to as many people inside the studio as we possibly can, give them as much access to materials as we possibly can, so that the games, can be as authentic as possible. I think the business has come a long way where, I've worked on games where you weren't allowed to read the script as a developer, yet everybody wanted a really authentic game, which there's obviously no logic to that, to now where we get certain assets in and our film guys call us and they say, hey, we just got some, animation cycles in, we got Maya files in, we know that your developer is going to need that because they've begun to sort of understand what the game development process looks like. I think as we talk about free to play, it's become sort of much more evolved, much more sophisticated, where so much of success is based on sort of being able to push down regular content updates, right, to maintain retention. So when I look at a game that we're involved with, Minion Rush, right, we've done a content update with Gameloft every 6 to 8 weeks, like clockwork, for the last 3 years, right, and that was both sides working together to put a process in place that allowed for that type of efficiency, so that you could sort of get all the reviews and sort of playthroughs in and build milestones in that you need to everybody feels good about the content, but that you can actually sort of work at that type of pace and that type of cadence to sort of keep the content coming. So I think as people on the studio side learn more about the game business, and I feel like in many cases, like, we're there now, like, it's just you approach it with a realistic attitude for what's required.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We also work really closely with any licensor partner and making sure up front that you establish what the pipeline is going to look like, and keeping that approval process very fluid and frequent, because we've certainly had experiences in the past where we've been bottlenecked by various approval restrictions or things like that.
As my wife will tell everyone in this room, it's like most good relationships, it's all about communication.
Yep.
Yeah, and for Jameel and Chris, I mean, what kind of involvement do you expect? I mean, is there something you expect? Is it something that you just kind of have to wait and see? Like, I mean, working especially with a variety of celebrities, and I'd be curious for Jameel too, with Demi Lovato, of course, and Mean Girls is a brand that at least we at Scopely were like kind of surprised by that one, and we're amazed. It's a really inspired choice, but it's a brand that, I don't know, do they have like active brand managers and a lot going on right now with a brand that's as old as that is, and it hasn't been a movie in a while? Like, what kind of relationship do you guys want or need from your partners in that regard?
Yeah, I think for us it varies based on the project. I think if you're talking about kind of a catalog title like Mean Girls, there's no new movie coming out, and it's been around for a while, and so I think for a project like that, there might be fewer people that are sort of working on that kind of day to day versus let's say like an upcoming movie or in terms of working with a celebrity. So I think for us it varies, but at the beginning of the project we'll sort of decide how much interaction is required. Are we going to be meeting weekly, or more than that, or less frequent than that? And so we figure out based on the project how much back and forth is required, and then kind of go from there and just make sure we're on track along the way.
But isn't it amazing how the single biggest touch point for that brand is now your game? It's like, that's what I always find. I was going to answer this earlier with the marketing question, but for our Ice Age games, I mean, by far it's the biggest active touch point for that brand. when you have millions of people playing a game and are totally engaged with it and playing 20 to 30 minutes a day, it's pretty miraculous that you can have that with a dormant brand.
Yeah, and I think the success was also surprising and great for us to see even a movie kind of 10, 11 years later still gets that type of engagement on mobile every day still.
Yeah, it's been really cool. Yeah, for us, we look for very deep engagements, definitely, especially from the celebrity partners, right? So like looking at Gordon, since that was our most recent launch, like from the very first meeting, he's sitting there like thinking back to his entire path of becoming a star chef and how he started and very humble beginnings and had to grind his way up, and like he was really engaged in thinking about how he could take elements of his story and actually put them into the game. And so like obviously as a celebrity chef, or any chef really, you're always pursuing that 3-star Michelin rating, and so he's like, how can we kind of bring that into the game? And that ultimately led to what's called in the game the Michelin star system. So those are the kind of like authentic integrations that we're really looking for, and not only is that great for the game and for the audience, but also shows that your partner is really engaged and cares about what we're creating together.
One other thing I would add is just the transparency amongst partners. So I think it's easy to sort of share information when everything's on schedule, right, and everything's going well, but it's game development, right? So things are going to change, things are going to slip, everybody gets that. I think from a brand owner and sort of studio perspective, we'd rather know that sooner than later, and then we can sort of work together to sort of figure out what that means in terms of adjusting schedule, whatever it might be. It's where it's sort of, maybe the developer and publisher knows it, but they're sort of, keeping it close to the chest until it's too late, and then we get the call at the 23rd hour of oh, that game that was going to come out, isn't coming out, right? Nobody likes that, and so it's always a better experience if there's just
no surprises.
That sharing of information, and then we can solve that together. And I think publishers and developers that we're in business, we encourage them to just give us all the information, good and bad, and then we'll figure it out.
Another thing my wife will agree with, no surprises unless it's my birthday. All right, so I guess just to wrap things up, I want to leave a few minutes for some questions out here. We can keep going if there aren't any, but just to open it up to everyone. Before we do, is there a formula? Is there a single piece of advice? What are the hallmarks of the things that are really working and working at scale over long periods of time? Why does one game that's similar to another work versus the other? What are the things that you see in common?
Passion and getting the brand right.
Yeah, I think it's getting the right fit with the users, the brand, and the game.
Yeah, the right interpretation of the brand, whatever that means, and it can mean some creative liberties, as we talked about earlier, but also the team. We say it all the time, right? The developers are our talent in the game industry. You got to find the right team that sort of matches the product.
Yeah, definitely. I think team and a proven focus on a genre and engine are all important, but ultimately, unfortunately for us, there does not seem to be any formula that you can just copy and paste. So I think it really comes down to innovating each time, creating an amazing game, and really nothing else can make up for that.
Agreed. Well, thank you guys very much. Appreciate all the insights, and let's open it up for some questions from the room. So the question is for the room that licensing is growing as a part of any property's business, and as is mobile entertainment. What do you guys see in the future, in the next few years, as these two areas continue to grow?
Consolidation, higher development budgets.
Yeah, I think I see that as well. But I think also in the next 5 years, you might see a few things kind of going the other way, or maybe it started off as a game and then ends up in Hollywood. And I think you're starting to see that with some of the movies that are coming out around now. But I think you'll see more of that in the next 5 years.
I think we'll see sort of an ecosystem where sort of the film is telling one part of a story, the game is telling another part of a story, maybe there's digital comics that's telling another part of a story, and it's all sort of interrelated and very well sort of coordinated and orchestrated on all sides. I think the other thing that's interesting is just, are games really marketing for films, or is that the intent when you go into them? I think from our view at least, they're meant to be standalone entertainment experiences that can sort of live on for as long as the game can possibly live on. And then in success, you have a platform from which you then have some marketing benefits. But I would say we don't enter into it as the game is a marketing sort of device for the film. We have big enough sort of marketing budgets for our films to launch them successfully. Where we think they can add a lot of value is that sort of engagement sort of in between films and keeping that audience coming back sort of day after day, telling different parts of the story, all of those kind of things. So, I think there's a lot of nuance in exactly what purpose, games can serve as part of an overall franchise.
Actually, Devin.
Also, one more thing.
Go ahead. I was gonna say
Pokemon Go. I promised myself I would mention it on this panel somehow.
Nice, well done. I thought we were going to make it. So I was going to ask you, actually, Devin. I imagine there's a handful of independent developers out there who haven't raised $50 million or are listed on the public market or whatever. You mentioned
60 actually.
Sorry about that, Jameel. If consolidations in the future, if bigger production budgets, if it's more expensive to market and you need to market these things, I know you're working with smaller developers. How does that come about? What does that look like?
Again, it's like a broken record. Passion, understanding the brand and being able to deliver on the brand promise and the vision, the creator's vision is the most important thing. I think, unfortunately, we're probably going to see less of us working with smaller developers. But again, taking the TinyCo example, I mean, we had a big, long process for the Family Guy license after the success of The Simpsons, and there were sort of the usual suspects in that process, big guys and TinyCo. And I think back, I mean, they were a pretty small company at the time, venture backed, and
they were a tiny company at the time.
Nice one. So they won that license based on their passion and understanding of the brand, and they were able to execute on it. So that's really what it comes down to. It helps if you're well capitalized, so we know you're not gonna blow away, and we're not tying up a license with a failing company. But we've taken some risks, and look, we did a deal with Rovio before. They were big. We were their third Angry Birds game, so this was 2010. So that was kind of a risk with a new movie that we had. But yeah, so it comes down to brand passion and love.
Cool. Question right there.
Yeah, you actually just asked the same question, which is, as a licensor, what is it that incentivizes you to let a developer develop your brand? Is it just what you think is a brand fit? But I think you do take risks. But if there's anything on your end as a formula for what you think a developer has, what is that?
I mean, for me, personally, I have a lot of love for a lot of our brands, and so there's certain games I want to make I still haven't made yet. So I say this pretty much at every panel. Home Alone, if anyone's in for it. No, okay, no takers. This guy, all right. So for me, it's like telling a story, using the brand in an interesting way. I mean, we've got a battle card game coming out that has 5 of our animated TV shows in it. That really excites me, and I think is super fun, and that's what we look for.
Thank you guys for your insight. I was wondering if you could tell us about some success stories you've had with kind of international IPs or kind of international collaborations with some of your IP titles.
We're gonna keep talking. So we're spending a lot of time in Asia, obviously. It's, you can't ignore the three of the biggest markets. Our IP doesn't resonate as much. I mean, in Japan, almost nothing. China, our big film brands resonate there, but no television, almost no television. So it's challenging, but what we did in the past was we would just try and publish the game, our Western games, in those territories. What we're doing now is going there, finding partners on the ground, and doing local versions of our game. So we'll launch our Ice Age game in China with a Chinese developer in August. It's like, the content is suited for the market, and we have really high hopes for it. We always get a ton of downloads with Ice Age in China, but just having, and no revenue. In this case, I think this is going to be a real opportunity to take advantage of that market. This is a company that knows that market and the user base and what kind of gameplay they like, and I'm sure the monetization is going to be turned up a little bit, but that I think is going to be our secret to success internationally.
Similar kind of approach, but with something like Minion Rush, without getting onto the numbers, we're literally hundreds of millions of downloads in the China market, but in general, what we like to do is work with our partners to have their local marketing teams in whatever territory that is, all throughout Europe, Latin America, and have them work with our local teams on the ground to sort of execute promotions, be that at retail, be that with packaged good partners, and it's really sort of putting local people from both teams working together in their local markets where they have the expertise, where I think you can sort of find those success stories.
Yeah, one thing I'll say also is that it's oftentimes really surprising. Even looking at if you look at raw data, The Walking Dead is the most popular illegally downloaded show in China. So it's getting a lot of eyeballs on that show, but not only is the government a potential blocker for releasing a bloody game about humans killing humans, but there's actually a reticence, it seems, to folks actually playing that type of content. It's just a little different than the type of RPG they're used to. So, we've been surprised by some of the IPs that we have that are coming down the pipe that we've been talking to, foreign distribution partners about, and they're like super excited about this IP or this type of game that we actually weren't really expecting to be sort of our China play. And when you look at sort of just the reach of Walking Dead in a territory, you have to imagine that you're going to be able to exploit that. We're having trouble, specifically in China, with that one. Well, thank you to Kathy and the organizers. Really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun, and I'm sure the guys will be happy to answer any questions after the panel as well. Thanks.